Boba Fett is a bad guy. Boba Fett's a bad guy. He's a bad guy. He's a bad guy. Right? Right? If you ask a Star Wars fan 20 or 30 years ago, they'd say, yes, Boba Fett is a bad guy. I mean, look at the helmet, the armor, the attitude.
No disintegration.
He's shoulder to shoulder with Darth Vader doing the Empire's dirty work. Even Imperial officers think bounty hunters are scum.
We don't need that scum.
So it should be an open shut case. Boba Fett is a bad guy. Or is he? So let's put it to the test. So far, we've pretty well established that Boba Fett is guilty by association. He works for the Empire is evil, open and shut case, roll credits, leave me alone. But wait, if we're even going to consider the possibility that BF isn't as bad as he seems, we have to establish what good and bad really means. Let's consider two alternatives to the Boba equals bad narrative. First, like any fictional character from a sweeping space opera saga worthy of their own exclusive spin-off, we have to be open to the possibility that Boba Fett's fundamental view of right and wrong has changed over his lifetime. As fiction imitates reality, it's only natural that individuals grow and regrow as priorities, choices, and experiences reshape their world or galactic view. That doesn't necessarily mean bad to good or good to bad. It could be bad to worse or good to great. Or it could be a never-ending cycle of moral waffling. So just keep that in mind as we continue our examination of Boba Fett's character. Secondly, just as Boba occasionally goes home and rethinks his life,
Go home and rethink my life.
so too does everyone else in the galaxy. We have to consider the social and ethical context of the galaxy as a whole. Consider that BF has seen a republic and an empire rise and fall in his own lifetime. And moreover, the real world has changed over the decades, altering perceptions and interpretations of the Star Wars franchise. All that is to say that BF's moral character can't be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, but rather must be examined in the totality of circumstances. And we might conclude that this or that action was right or wrong. It's only from the high ground that we can make any moral judgment of his character. Before we can have a meaningful dialogue to determine the rectitude of Boba Fett's moral character, we have to establish the context in which he exists and operates. It's no stretch of the imagination to believe that Boba lives like his father Jango as a
simple man trying to make my way in the universe.
And the galaxy is not as simple as it first appeared. In the world of the original Star Wars, the line between good and evil is pretty clearly drawn, at least insofar as we're to accept events as they're seen through the eyes of a lowly farm boy. In classic monomyth fashion, our protagonist is pitted against obstacles, which the audience is expected to view as representations of badness. Well, this has a kinda, sorta, perennial Jungian underpinning. The narrative presumption of good and evil is situated in the audience's socio-political climate. In this case, tyrannical, militant autocracy is bad, and hard-working, plucky, down-on-their-luck, put-upon outsiders are the good guys. And the audience is at their liberty to transpose whatever they feel oppressed by onto the bad guy empire and cast themselves as the bootstrapping good guy who will prevail no matter what because space magic. And allegorically speaking, it works pretty darn well. And frankly, in that black and white galaxy, there's just not much room for a character like Boba Fett. But then, the Empire struck back, and that galaxy got just a little bigger. Thus begins a long slide into ethical uncertainty spanning decades as Lucas and company scramble to make sense of that galaxy far, far away. Boba Fett presents the problem of otherness turned usness. By example, I'd like for you to look at another epic saga, Lord of the Rings. In Middle-earth, we have a clear, comforting line between good and evil. You got orcs, you got goblins, you got wraiths, you got whatever the hell Sauron is, all bent on destroying and or enslaving the whole world. It doesn't take a Socrates or a Gandalf to tell you that destroying and or enslaving the whole world is generally bad. And then you have these nice Anglo-Saxon guys who are going to put a stop to all that badness. Fine, whatever. The orcs are the others. They are overall nameless monsters whose very existence is an abomination against God and nature and civilization and good table manners and anything else you might view as our Western moral bedrock. The orc is to Lord of the Rings what the stormtrooper is to Star Wars. But even before Attack of the Clones was ever dreamt of, with Boba Fett here, you had an anonymous, helmeted Imperial goon that was not exactly evil entirely, maybe? Consider that the Imperial officers consider bounty hunters scum. But if Imperials are bad guys, then good guys would be scum to them. I mean, calling our heroes rebel scum all the time,
You rebel scum.
would imply that anyone the baddies think are scum are possibly heroes. So by transference, that would make Boba Fett, in his very first big screen appearance, a good guy. But we were sure that anyone wearing a helmet and full body covering was definitely a bad guy. I mean, if guys in helmets and armor aren't unquestionably evil, then what if all this time, at least some of the stormtroopers were just folks, just average Joes, everyday, run-of-the-mill, hard-working farm boys trying to make their way in the galaxy? What then? I mean, our so-called heroes killed a lot of them. A whole lot of them are dead and never going to see their families ever again. Like, so many. I mean, Luke himself wanted to be an Imperial pilot, as Han Solo had been. Suddenly it's not so obvious that killing the stormtroopers is the same thing as killing the bad guys. And I think Lucas realized this. You have the whole issue introduced in Kevin Smith's Clerks about the political implications of being willing to work on a space station called the Death Star.
Not just Imperials, is that what you're getting at?
Exactly.
The mere existence of such a weapon would imply strong-arm authority where, in the words of Ayn Rand, the last argument is a big friggin' space gun. And I suppose the Death Star could be a kind of nuclear deterrent. But, like, deterrent against who? What enemy or nation-state actor is threatening the Empire from the outside? There's never any mention of a powerful threat beyond the Empire's borders. So who could the Death Star be aimed at besides the very populace that sanctioned its construction? That's not really a technological terror you should be proud of.
Don't be too proud of this technological terror you've constructed.
Surely there was some sense of wrongness felt by the designers and builders and janitors. Oh, where do you work? Oh, the Death Star. Okay, the Star of Death. So how's the pay? Lucas counters this issue by explaining in the director's commentary of Attack of the Clones that the Death Star was built by Geonosians, i.e. just bugs, just gross old bugs. So no moral problem there, because we all know bugs are gross, and they deserve to die. But come to find out, the bugs have a whole society of their own. Though we can't know for sure, it's possible the bugs are eusocial, meaning they put the needs of the group over the individual. Like ants and bees. A situation that some might argue is morally superior to humanity. So no, heck no, it's not any better to kill Geonosians than stormtroopers or anyone else without, like, due process and appeals and self-defense arguments. Lucas tackles this problem with the introduction of battle droids. Battle droids are the quintessential others. They are totally anonymous, uniform, and unencumbered by autonomy. As Obi-Wan points out,
if droids could think, there'd be none of us here, would there?
If they are bereft of free will, they cannot be the object of moral scrutiny. But wait! What about R2, and 3PO, and BB-8, and K-2SO, and IG-11, and L-337 turned Millennium Falcon? Who, by the way, advocates for a droid revolution. Okay, no problem.
Send in the clone!
Clones are the quintessential others. They are anonymous, uniform, and unburdened by autonomy. Except there's Boba Fett. Fine, whatever. The clones are conditioned to obey commands. Like a brainwashed Winter Soldier Manchurian candidate who will kill their own generals without question or conscience. Except some of them don't. Also, there's like a microchip in their brain that makes them loyal, unquestioning, and unfeeling. Except there's the Bad Batch and Fives, and a whole story arc about how computer chips don't define our morality. So I mean, it's like we can't kill anybody anymore. So the real question is, how are we going to have a Star Wars or a blankety-blank wars without killing innocent, hard-working farmers and soldiers and law enforcers and brothers and sisters and fathers and sons, and what is good and evil anyway? Lucas turned Disney is quixotically searching conceptual space for a morally unambiguous zone that is ultimately inconsistent with sentience. This process played out across dozens of years and movies, comics, TV shows, and video games has turned the otherness of Boba Fett into the usness of a relatable series of difficult and sometimes tragic life choices. And through all this, Boba Fett has remained a law enforcement agent of the legitimate government. Remember that Palpatine was voted unlimited powers.
Thunderous applause.
If anything, Boba Fett's steadfastness, viewed through the lens of a schizophrenic political parallax, would appear as moral ambivalence. In fact, anyone who lives long enough and remains true to their ideals will alternate between hero and villain in the eyes of the young or the naive. And when you reach far, far down to the last chip of morality in the Pringles can of life, you see that your choices are not rational, self-interested syllogisms, but irrational, self-interested deontologies. So we're still wondering how Boba Fett could possibly be a good guy when the government he works for unabashedly enslaves its people under the threat of destruction.
No star system will dare oppose the Emperor now.
Well, we have to ask ourselves, do the people and Boba Fett even know what the audience knows about the Empire and the Death Star? There's no galactic glasnost. We have every reason to believe a vast propaganda machine floods society with misinformation. So we have to ask ourselves if earning a living as a law enforcement agent is morally viable under an illegitimate government. But also whether those within the government even know if that government is legitimate. The point is, there's a socio-ethical meandering as the galactic public vacillates through a Hegelian dialectic of autocracy and democracy. Sometimes it's hard to tell a George Washington from a Julius Caesar without the benefits of centuries of hindsight, or at least a little omniscient narration. It's been said that service without love is slavery. That is, if you're doing what you're doing for any other reason than you love doing it, then you are a slave to something. But consent can be manufactured by the aforementioned propaganda machine. Unless we read whatever we want to read into Boba Fett calling his ship Slave 1, there's no way of knowing whether Boba Fett chooses to serve the Empire out of some sense of loyalty to its ideology, or simply because they pay him for what he loves to do. And Boba loves being a bounty hunter. Not only is it his family profession, but you might say it's in his DNA. Moreover, Boba doesn't work exclusively for the Empire. Evidence suggests that he was in fact working for Jabba during the events of The Empire Strikes Back, as he insists on taking Han Solo back alive. Remember that freezing Han Solo in carbonite was not Boba Fett's idea. Now, we might point out that Boba Fett was working for a known gangster. And gangsters are bad. But just as Luke and Leia are outlaws, being labeled a gangster could be seen as just another way the Empire vilifies those who exist outside its jurisdiction. And while I don't advocate for the death penalty, I'll only point out that Jabba controls the entire planet of Tatooine.
It's controlled by the Hutt.
And therefore his judgment and sentencing of known war criminals is legitimate.
His Excellency hopes that you will die honorably.
In that sense, on Jabba's barge, Bubba is performing a lawful apprehension of convicted criminals actively trying to escape their sentence. And given that in A New Hope, Luke professed his hatred of the Empire,
it's not that I like the Empire, I hate it, but there's nothing I can do about it right now.
It's possible that the majority sentiment on the Outer Rim is that the Empire is bad. That would make Jabba as much a rebel as the main characters. Well, the two groups may have run afoul of each other, we can hardly blame Boba Fett for upholding the law on that particular planet. That leads us to believe that Boba Fett is trying to do what he feels is right, and does his best to side with the law. Because let's face it, whether or not the Empire is evil, there is still evil out there. As we learned in that wretched hive of scum and villainy, there are dangerous men warranting the death sentence on 12 systems.
I have the death sentence on 12 systems.
Someone has to catch these random villains. Who else but the agents of the government like Boba Fett? I mean, did you see any police anywhere? I don't know. Maybe they've been defunded on a galactic scale. I don't know. But maybe Boba Fett came to Tatooine to catch evildoers like Dr. Evazan and put an end to their bullying of poor, downtrodden, hardworking farm boys. Wouldn't that make Boba Fett a good guy? Maybe, possibly a hero? Now we look ahead at the new series, The Book of Boba Fett. More than 30 years later, we get to see Dad Bod Boba Fett rise from the shifting sands of a rapidly changing political climate. Who knows where this new story will take us? Regardless of whether Boba was good or bad, right or wrong, there's nothing like the prospect of being slowly digested over 1,000 years to bring about a renaissance of the soul. Perhaps nothing in a character's past can predicate their future. And also, Boba Fett's a good guy, right?